The second most common metabolic bone disorder after osteoporosis is a disease called Paget's disease. Uh, and Paget's disease is a little bit difficult to understand at first because what people with Paget's disease end up with is enlarged bones and actually radiographically dense bones. Um, but it's not a problem of overactivity of osteoblasts. It's actually a problem of overactivity of osteoclasts. Something causes the osteoclasts to actually get bigger and become hyperactive, and they start eating bone at a fairly prodigious rate. They start taking away bone uh, very quickly, uh, and then the bones deform. Uh, because what happens is these weakened bones end up with a fibrous connective tissue, like almost scarring within the bone structure itself, and then new bone is laid on top of that. And so you end up with these very large, weak bones. It affects about 1 million people in the US. It can affect both men and women, but it's usually in men. Uh, and and here it says people from Northwest Europe. In your textbook on page 655, it talks about people of British descent. And I would say that in my practice and the dozens and dozens of people that I've met with Pagets, probably the vast majority of them have been English. They've been British. So it kind of seems to run in families, and so there's that factor. But it's very strange in that uh, it it doesn't go systemic. It doesn't become uh, everywhere. So they think that there might be a slow acting virus or a predisposition to have this reaction, a genetic predisposition to have this reaction to some slow virus, or an environmental cause, or something, because it tends to be in one bone, often the skull. So what happens is the osteoclasts become huge and hyperactive, and then the osteoclasts try and replace that bone that's being taken away, but they can't keep up. So the fibroblasts start laying down fibrous connective tissue as well. The fibroblasts trying to help out. So it's this really rapid turnover of bone to the point where the replacement bone is disorganized and it's weak. It's not laid down on stress lines. It seems to be separated by uh, areas of connective tissue. So it's often a problem. I've seen it in skulls, I've seen it in vertebrae, and I've seen it in the long bones of the arms. It and but apparently uh, the bones of the leg, not of the thigh, but of the legs, seem to be prone to it as well. Um, when you look at it, it it looks radiodense. This is it here in this vertebrae. Um, we call them ivory vertebrae. When you see it in an X-ray, it ends up looking like the one bone is got way too much. It's too radio dense compared to the others. So, what do these people get? At first, nothing. There's no symptoms. Now, uh, it used to be that diagnosis was often made uh, by hat size. Now, a few years ago, 50 or 60 years ago, most men wore hats, fedoras, and that kind of thing, and um, they knew their hat size. Uh, and so, if you spend your entire life, your entire adult life, at 7.5, and all of a sudden 7.5 don't fit you, and you become like an 8.5, then that becomes curious. Your skull is actually getting bigger, and that's often the first sign of Paget's disease. Now, one of the things that happens when the skull gets bigger is that the foramen in the skull actually gets smaller, and so you can get neurological problems. You can get vascular problems to the brain. I don't know if the jugular foramen gets small, it's going to lead to headaches, going to lead to vascular headaches. Nerves will get pinched, the cranial nerves. There'll be hearing loss. Oftentimes, the, uh, the oval window in the cochlea kind of starts to close up, and so there is a hearing loss that way. Um, if it happens in the arms or the legs, the the bones start to change shape. I knew this guy who had it in his right ulna, and his ulna got way bigger than his radius, and so it ended up bowing because the distance between his elbow and his wrist didn't change on the radius, but it did on the ulna. So the ulna ended up bowing out and becoming huge. So he had forearms like Popeye. Um, and it was really disconcerting because uh, he was Royal Navy, and he had an anchor tattoo right in the middle of his right forearm, and he had this deformity that had forearms like Popeye. It was quite a disconcerting sight. I'll tell you. Um, these bones become weak, so they end up with pathological fractures. They can end up with arthritis because of the different pressures on the joints because of the shape of bone. They can be central nervous system problems, especially the brain starts to get compressed on the inside. The foramen in the skull start to close down. It can be quite a problem. Another thing that can happen is that this osteoclastic activity releases a lot of calcium into the bone. So what it does is it hyperpolarizes nerves and muscles. So tiredness and weakness, paresthesias, that kind of thing, are known in this. Uh, as the bone grows and pushes, it stretches the periosteum, and that can be quite painful. It's like growing pains. Growing pains in children is bone growing too fast for the periosteum, and stretching the periosteum, and the nerves in the periosteum react, and it becomes painful. It's a deep gnawing pain, and that's what these people feel as well. Uh, so it's usually picked up on X-ray, on radiographs. Uh, they can uh, they can also pick it up uh, with blood tests. What can you do about it? That becomes a real issue. Uh, maybe exercise, physical therapy, surgery. As you know, cut out the bad bone sort of thing. I don't believe that there's a lot that can be done. Especially if you start ending up with spinal stenosis or cranial nerve uh, problems. The auditory nerves, especially. It's where hearing aids seems to be um, as much as you can. Um, the the Fosamax and the bisphosphates um, seem to work because their job is to slow down osteoclastic activity, and that's why they use it for osteoporosis. But in this case, since the osteoclasts are the problem, it directly it directly affects that. Uh, Now, sometimes they need surgery to almost open up holes in the skull to relieve pressure. Um, um, if the person exercises, then what ends up happening is the stresses placed on that bone cause better bone deposition, better osteoblastic activity in that area, and that may minimize the effects of the advanced osteoclastic activity. So that early in the course, that's an important thing. Uh, so the prognosis is really variable. It varies widely between people. Sometimes the progression is really slow. Sometimes it's rapid. It's not fatal on its own, but it can cause complications uh, that are quite a bit um, uh, life-threatening or disease-causing. Now, in rare cases, Paget's disease can turn into a type of fairly aggressive bone cancer. Uh, it's really Paget's sarcoma, and prognosis for those people is very poor. Um, yeah. So, uh, massage is probably fine, especially body wide. Uh, maybe caution around the affected area, but it really is shouldn't be that big a deal. Uh, and like I say, most of the people I've ever met with Paget's disease have a fairly slow progressing, reasonably mild form, maybe some bone deformity, but a lot of pain that you can help deal with.